Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and in every generation in the Jewish world, there are Gedolei Hador, great leaders of the generation. Gedolei is from the Hebrew word gadol, large or great, dor, which means generation. And while the term Gedolei Hador has been mostly reserved for the great rabbinic sages of a generation, the term can also be applied to those in the Jewish world who make a unique and significant contribution to Jewish life and to the well-being of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. And on this edition of L'Chaim, I have the enormous privilege to be able to meet with a true Gedolei Hador of our generation. And at the risk of embarrassing him, he is the individual I have wanted most as a guest on L'Chaim. I am speaking of David M. Friedman, the immediate past American ambassador to the State of Israel, who during the 4 years of the Trump administration literally changed the face and the character of the Middle East, especially as it applies to the Jewish State of Israel. Along with his colleagues of the administration, David helped fulfill America's promise to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. By the way, a promise he made to me on JBS on a stand-up interview a number of years ago. And David also helped Israel to formally incorporate the Golan Heights. And despite all the naysayers who ridiculed Donald Trump's suggestion that a deal was possible of economic treaties between Israel and the Arab Emirates, it was done by David Friedman and the administration, for which David Friedman and his colleague Jared Kushner have both been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. To give you just a taste of David Friedman's background, he was a kid who grew up in the Five Towns, which for those of you who don't know New York, is a hub of Orthodox life on Long Island. David's mother, Addie, was a high school English teacher, and his father, Morris, was the longtime and revered rabbi of Temple Hillel in North Woodmere. And I had the good fortune to meet Morris Friedman when he served as president of the New York Board of Rabbis. And Morris was known as a rabbi's rabbi. That's the highest accolade from other rabbis. David Friedman earned his BA from Columbia College and got his law degree from NYU. He specializes in bankruptcy law at his own law firm. And ultimately, Donald Trump asked him to become the U.S. ambassador to Israel, which again led to dramatic successes and changes in the entire structure of the Middle East and the State of Israel. Not that David's confirmation went smoothly. It was somewhat contentious, reminiscent of the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. The issue in David Friedman's case was he was on the one hand on the right, which bothered people like Menendez and Nadler. But more, David Friedman had written against the two-state solution. And David, I'd like to start there by talking to you about your perspective on the two-state solution. But first, I want to say to you, Kol HaKavod for all the successful work you did as U.S. ambassador to Israel. Yasher Koach and Mazal Tov. You have accomplished feats which many believed were impossible. Again, moving the embassy, helping Israel on the Golan Heights. And I said it before, everybody was ridiculing you and Donald Trump. How will you ever make any kind of peace with the Arab world? And lo and behold, you created and you crafted a peace between Israel, a series of economic treaties between Israel and the Arab Emirates, and it was just amazing. And I hope, look, your work is far from over, David. I'm sorry you can't rest, but you should take enormous pride, and it means the world to me. I am thrilled that you're giving me some time on L'chaim. I really am an enormous fan of yours, and I believe what you've done is a model for Jewish life. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you for your kind words. They're really deeply appreciated. As I heard you offer some compliments, I couldn't help but miss my parents, who would have loved to have heard you say that, on this earth. I hope they're listening. But and I want to thank you for something that may come as a surprise to you. But my mother my mother passed away about 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. But before that, for 3 or 4 years, she was bedridden, and which was very hard for her because she led a very active life. And she watched your show religiously, and it really was important to her to watch it, and it was important to all of us because it engaged her, it kept her thinking, it kept her mind working. It gave us things to talk about when her mind was beginning to fail, and I think you really had a significant, profoundly positive effect on the quality of her life, for which we're enormously grateful. Now, you probably don't know any of that,
no,
but I wouldn't want to begin without saying that to you.
That is so sweet of you to say, and I mean this. I'm only sorry, based on what I know of you. I am sorry I never had the chance to meet your mother. I met your father, but not, again, it was more of a perfunctory, formalized meeting. But I would have liked to have, no, but, talk for one moment. You're growing up in Woodmere. What were your parents like as people? And you grew up in a conservative synagogue. Your father was a conservative rabbi. I assume, if I'm wrong, you'll tell me, that you grew up in a mainstream conservative household. So that was the Jewish tenor. But what was the feel of your mother and father? Were they soft? Were they loving? Were they touchy-feely? And did they have a sense of humor? And what was their own commitment to Judaism?
So my father's synagogue was very large. It was not. I don't think it was sort of the conservative movement of today. It was, people sometimes refer to as conservadox.
Yes.
It was kind of right leaning. Very warm community. My father was a beloved rabbi. Served there for many years. He was spared much of the aggravation that rabbis often go through because congregants come and go, and generations come and go, and sometimes that's not a kind outcome for the rabbi.
Yes, you're right.
He had a very, very good life. My father was all in on the synagogue. He was a brilliant man, great orator, deeply cared about the people. Now, when you have to administer to 1,000 families, hard to be home all the time. During the week, most of the time wasn't home when we were home. My mother made the decision early on that she would not be a typical Rebbitzin where, part of the job was hers. I mean, she would give a class here and there, but she was committed to staying home with us, and she contributed massively to our sense of security, our self-esteem, our the way we dealt with each other. But my parents were incredible people.
Oh,
Love them dearly and miss them terribly. And each one in their own way had very, very strong influences on me.
you were very lucky, David.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
If I'm not mistaken, you're one of five. Is that right?
No, I have five. I'm one of three. I have five of my own, but
Okay.
I'm one of three. I have an older. I'm the youngest. I have an older brother and sister, and then we have my wife Tammy and I are blessed with five children, and so far, bli ayin hara, 11 grandchildren.
That is amazing. Mazal tov. Fabulous. 11 grandchildren. Amazing. Um, was it hard for you to be the child of the rabbi?
No, so I really enjoyed it. I don't know that my brother and sister enjoyed it as much as I did. I like the attention. I like being the public focus. There's a certain there's a certain respect the rabbi's son gets in the shul. There are a lot of pretty girls in the shul, and some of them I think were drawn to me because I was the rabbi's son more than the fact that I was anything in my own right. So it was I just loved the experience, and again I think it was primarily because the synagogue treated my parents so well that I felt so comfortable there. And so yeah, I had a charmed childhood, I think, with with a lot of effort being undertaken by my parents to make sure I grew up secure and happy and healthy and with some self-confidence.
I am so happy for you. That's a lovely story. And you wish everybody could speak about their childhood and their parents as you just did. All right, so
Back to the 2 days. You want to go back to the two-state solution?
yeah, and I referenced the fact that you're on the right, and whatever that means in today's Jewish world. But and I mentioned that the confirmation hearings were bumpy. Were they hard on you emotionally, or you just sort of rode it through?
The confirmation hearings weren't difficult at all. I mean, I came from the perspective of, I was a trial lawyer, so I'm used to mixing it up with people that don't agree with you, and I was, I prepared very hard for the hearing. What bothered me really was was some of the criticism on the left, not because they're not entitled to their views, and I understand the views and the strength of those views, and I don't diminish it or criticize it. But what became of the criticism was a sense that I was not just someone on the right, but that I was lacking in compassion or sensitivity for people who were struggling or unsensitive to the plight of Palestinians or of those who were less fortunate. I mean, none of that was me. So hearing that, reading that in the paper, that I'm kind of a hard right fanatic. When you see yourself being described in a way in which you yourself fundamentally don't agree with, that was more painful. But it didn't last, because ultimately I was able to replace all of that speculation about who I was with reality. For
Yes.
4 years, I was a very public figure. People knew exactly what I thought and did, and they could form their own decisions. And there, I wasn't upset, because the decisions that people made, the opinions they formed, were based on reality. So it's something that we all, I think, need to work harder on. I don't relish the fact that I'm vilified by large segments of institutional Jewish world. I don't consider that a badge of honor. Some people say you're known by your enemies. I don't look at it that way. I mean, I really I have nothing against the Jewish people of any stream or of no stream. It's not. These are very personal decisions, and I respect people's decisions, and I don't form views of people based on how they choose to worship or not worship. I wish that we could kind of work on more substantive and civilized discussions and get away from the hard right and the hard left, because I don't think it's good for the Jewish world.
You're absolutely right, and I hope people are really hearing what you just said, and maybe some will take it to heart. All right, take a moment, reflect upon your own opinion here. And as I read sort of the arc that you went through from Donald Trump suggesting inviting you to be the ambassador to the point that you are confirmed and sworn in by Vice President Pence, the question becomes, what was your attitude to the two-state solution? Did you have to change it for political reasons as you were being confirmed? And we're very interested in understanding how did the two-state solution play out in the Trump administration as you were working for the Abraham Accords. Now, I'll have more questions about that, but in general, what was and what is, David, your attitude towards a two-state solution?
So when I went before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a lot of Democrats were opposed to my candidacy because they felt that was too much against the two-state solution. And what I said there was something that I would endorse today, which is that the two-state solution is a solution, and it could be the gold standard for a solution if one is looking to find a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I also said it wasn't the only solution, and I think there are other ways to look at this. I said that all without the benefit of 4 years as the U.S. ambassador to Israel.
Yes.
Now, with the benefit of those 4 years, I have whatever hypothetical lip service I paid to the two-state solution. In other words, the idea that it might work, it might be a gold standard. I mean, the reality is right now that I don't think it is I don't think it's a solution. I mean, I just don't think that there is a means by which you could create a Palestinian state, and thereby narrow Israel's border, in places like Netanya or Tel Aviv to 8 or 9 miles wide. I don't think there's a way of doing that without creating an existential risk to the state of Israel. I just don't think you can. And so when I look at the problem right now, which admittedly has dumbfounded and stumped lots of smarter people than me, but as I look at it now, I say, okay, I think we know what we can't do. Okay, what we can't do are two different things. We can't create a Palestinian state in the sense that we envision a state being a state with their own military, their own autonomy, their own sovereignty, their own ability to make decisions, diplomatic as well as military decisions. Can't have a Palestinian state. The risks to Israel are too great. So that put that on one side. The flip side is we can't absorb 2.5 million Palestinians into the state of Israel. Okay, because A, it's a demographic nightmare. B, the Palestinians wouldn't necessarily even want to be part of a state of Israel. And third, the cost of that absorption is just massive. So you can't, it's sort of like, the old joke, can't live with them, can't live without them. You can't create a true Palestinian state, and you can't absorb the Palestinian population into the state of Israel. Those are two realities that very much limit your options in terms of what you can do. And so, when we wrote our peace plan, which we took 3 years to write because we kept changing it and we kept getting input from different people whose views are respected. But when we put out our peace plan in January of 2020, Trump's vision for peace, to a certain extent, it was a two-state solution, and what we called it was a realistic two-state solution. And what made it realistic, to be perfectly candid about it, was that the Palestinians weren't really getting a state. They were getting, civilian autonomy of the kind that would enable them to have influence over what they built, over what kind of businesses they engaged in, over what the schools would teach. But it wasn't really a state in the sense that they didn't control their airspace. They didn't control their borders. They didn't control their electromagnetic spectrum. They didn't control much. And so what that did is it sort of fulfilled what I think was, I think Netanyahu said at first, was the Palestinians can have as much autonomy as will not threaten the state of Israel. And this sort of tries to thread that needle. But the one thing that, so look, the people in America, the reaction was kind of, it was mixed. The right thought it was great, the left thought it wasn't great. But what was interesting about it was, if you go back, and think about Oslo, right now, the great hero of Oslo. I mean, he was a great hero for lots of purposes. But you look at Yitzhak Rabin, right, who was the hero of the Six-Day War. He's the architect of the Oslo Accords, and he is considered, on the left as the one who gave his life for the cause of peace. Every November 4th or 5th, there's a massive gathering in Kikar Rabin here in Tel Aviv, where people continue to light candles and cry over the death of Yitzhak Rabin, as they should, because he was a great, great man. But when Yitzhak Rabin went to sell Oslo to the Israeli Knesset, what he said was, when they asked him, where is this leading? He said, the Palestinians will have less than a state, and Israel will have a major presence in Judea and Samaria. Okay. That's the leader of the peace movement from 1994 to 1995.
That's right. Most people do not know that, David.
Very few people know that.
Right.
So what's happened is, when people say to me, you've gone too far to the right, I actually say, well, did you agree with Yitzhak Rabin? Yeah, he was great. Okay, well, the truth is, I'm in the same boat with Rabin. It's you guys that have moved too far to the left. The goalposts have moved over the past generation in a way that has moved, the goals much too far to the left, because Rabin, I think, kind of had it right. And so, I could be convinced of a two-state solution in the context of a state that kind of looks like what we put together in the Trump vision. I don't think if I were doing it today, I would call it a state, because I think it creates an expectation that's unrealistic. But I'll tell you a funny story, Mark. In 2017, Mahmoud Abbas went to visit Trump in Washington, and he came across as, the most sincere, gentlemanly, older man looking to, make peace at the end of his life. And Trump was very impressed. Then Trump came to Israel, and he was frankly coming to Israel to tell Bibi that, to push Bibi to make concessions, because he thought that Abbas was a real peacemaker. And, I kind of headed that off, because I knew what was happening. I didn't think it was good for the president. And we showed, at the time when Trump arrived, we showed him a 2 or 3 minute video of Abbas, offering some of the most vile comments about the Jewish people that have ever been stated. And Trump heard that and was shocked that this is the real Mahmoud Abbas. The next day he goes to Bethlehem, and he meets with Abbas, and he starts yelling at him and says, who are you? You come to me in Washington, you do this, then I see you on video, you're saying things that are completely inconsistent. And Abbas said to him, well, it's not my fault, it's the occupation. And Trump said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, there's an occupation. The Israelis are, everywhere I look, there's the Israeli army, there's the security forces, and, it's very hard for me not to lose my temper. And Trump said something to him, which was kind of, hysterical. He said to Abbas, he said, what is Israel charging you for these security services? To which Abbas looked at him like he had two heads. He said, they're not charging me anything. And Trump said, well, then you're getting a great deal, because if it wasn't for the Israeli security forces, you'd be taken over by Hamas or by Hezbollah or by ISIS or by Al-Qaeda. You wouldn't last an hour. So, I understand this thing about the occupation, and that, you don't like Israeli troops being there. And, maybe there's a way to cut it back, or to put them on different clothing or outfits, whatever. But, this is a very dangerous part of the world. And if you are, as you claim to be, a rational, moderate, Muslim leader, you better have Israel by your side, because otherwise, you're going to go the way of Anwar Sadat. And I thought that people don't give Trump a lot of credit, but I thought that his instincts there were very much accurate and consistent with my views, which is, we can talk about the Middle East and what we should do, and about the best way to accomplish a separation, if you agree that there should be a separation between Jews and Palestinians. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of facts on the ground, and you have no margin of error. God forbid you make the wrong decision, And now the Palestinians are shooting rockets instead of from Gaza into Sderot. They're shooting rockets, from Qalqilia into Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. My goodness. I mean, not only is that bad for Israel, but it's going to be an absolute disaster for the Palestinians, because the Israelis will respond, as you would expect, violently, decisively, and no one will be happy with the outcome. So, in the world of diplomacy here, there are two camps. There are those who wish for an outcome that kind of meets their internal, moral compass about self-determination and morality and independence, and maybe consistent with the writings of Jefferson or Hobbes or Locke, and then there's the reality that these things crash on the rocks of reality in the Middle East, and then there's the thing. Okay, you know what? This isn't America. We're not surrounded by the Atlantic and the Pacific and Canada and Mexico. This is the Middle East. We're surrounded by Syria and Lebanon, which to this day remain in a state of war with Israel. We're not far from Iraq. We're not far from Iran. It's a very different world. So what are we going to do? We're going to try to make people's lives as good as we possibly can. We're going to try to bring in, infrastructure and contiguity from community to community, and help people with education, build a university, build a hospital, build roads, improve the internet. There are, and then but do it in the context where Israel is ultimately in control of the overall security. That was our vision. It's not a two-state solution, but you can spend the next 50 more years waiting for a two-state solution, while the GDP per capita of the Palestinians is $4,000 per person, and GDP per capita in Israel is about $54,000. So we can continue that disparity and that dichotomy, or we could help create the infrastructure for the Palestinians to work with the Israelis to benefit from, the startup nation and the high-tech economy. Give them as much dignity and autonomy as they can, but also recognizing that the security challenges are daunting. So that's the very, very long-winded answer to your question about what I think of a two-state solution.
I loved it. David, you referenced Rabin, and Rabin supported Peace Now, Shalom Achav, which was an indigenous Israeli attempt by Israelis who really wanted to find a way to make peace with the Palestinians, a real movement, and it helped lead to Oslo. Who leads the Peace Now movement in the Palestinian world?
In the Palestinian world?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of one. I'm not aware of anyone. I mean,
That's right. That's right. And I will see every now and then an editorial in the New York Times written by an intellectual Israeli who is virulently critical of Netanyahu, the government, the lack of what they feel is a movement for peace. And this Israeli is representing some, even if it's a minority position, it's a position. Have you seen a similar piece in the New York Times by a Palestinian?
No, and one of the reasons why, because we had this experience when Jared sponsored an economic conference in Manama in Bahrain before we put out a peace plan, and he invited leaders of the Arab world, and he invited people like Stephen Schwarzman from Blackstone, one of the greatest investors in the world, and one of my colleagues, Stephen Mnuchin, the Secretary of the Treasury. I mean, real people willing to talk about real problems and to invest real money in Palestinian infrastructure. And the Palestinians boycotted the event.
Yes.
And those who showed up, a couple of people showed up anyway, and they were put in jail when they got back. So people need to understand that, look, every Israeli is putting their 18, 19, 20-year-old kids at risk, every single day. They don't want war. They don't want violence. They would love nothing more for their kids to, just go to college like we do at 18, instead of spending 3 years in the army. It's there's no one in Israel who doesn't want peace, but there is no one in Israel who's willing to surrender either to a terrorist state or to the risk of a terrorist state.
I don't understand how, and I'm going to talk about American Jewry. There are well-meaning American Jews who are very angry at Israel because there's no two-state solution. And yet the reality is exactly as you have described it. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that there is no one in the Palestinian world, and I'm not talking about leadership, who has such a charismatic presence in the Palestinian world that this leader can galvanize a certain kind of support within the political leadership and among the people. And I think it's less among the people than it is among the leadership of Hamas and Fatah, that there's nobody there who is ready to say to Israel, the Jewish state has a right to exist, and we will live side by side with you. And the Israeli people are ready to do that in a heartbeat, but there's no one to do it with. And David, what I fear is there's no one to do it today, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, in 100 years. And for people to then say, well, I'm sorry, we can't wait, Israel must, and then there's a litany of things that Israel must do, which, as you point out, puts the state of Israel into a compromised situation and where the security is at risk. And I don't understand why this isn't so clear to everyone that we all say, yes, it's a tragedy, and we'll sort of do what you suggest. We'll sort of try to pump into the Palestinian world things that bring their living standard up. At the same time, there are Israelis who say, you think you could buy the Palestinians? The Palestinians say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. As long as they say that, David, there's no room for you and the people you love in Israel and the people I love in Israel.
Look. I think there's the idea of buying their support is not possible, for lots of reasons. By the way, not for the reasons that they say, which is that we are so purely committed to Palestinian statehood that anything less than that we won't accept. It's because, look, there is the Palestinian society is not monolithic, anything close to it. Not just the fight between Hamas and the PA, or between Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which is even further violent than Hamas. There's never been a serious Palestinian national movement. We tend to think there has been, but there hasn't been. There's been a Palestinian terrorist movement that has become a national movement as a means of profiting from the world for this process. I mean, no one's going to sympathize with the terrorists, but if you say we're a national movement to create freedom and autonomy and independence and dignity, then that's worth something. And they've profited by years, but they've never really done the work. There are no Federalist Papers in the Palestinian society. There's nobody who's really sat down and thought about what would we look like as a state. And the reality is actually just the opposite. There are Palestinians in Syria, there are Palestinians in Jordan, there are Palestinians in Egypt, and there are Palestinians in Israel who are now citizens of Israel, and there are Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, and even those, I can tell you, the ones, for example, that I know the best are the ones that live in Hebron. They have nothing in common with the ones that are living in Ramallah.
That's
and they
right.
frankly don't like each other. So, there is a huge amount of tribalism, there, which hasn't, worked itself out into some kind of a serious national movement. So, it's not, it's not that Israel wants to throw money at them and they don't want the money because they can think they can make more money by maintaining this kind of nationalistic attitude, but it's paper thin. It's just paper thin. And but Mark, so rather than just tear Kriya over this, right, and mourn it, right? My view is, notwithstanding all of this, Israel needs to decide this issue, by itself, for itself. I give speeches in Israel all the time, and I say, there's 190 countries in the world, and more than half of them are younger than the state of Israel. Israel needs to stop looking at itself as this young country, dependent upon, America. Of course, that alliance is critical, but what I've said is that it's kind of time to grow up. Now there's 190 countries in the world. There aren't that many countries that if you ask them, what are your borders? A kid in third grade won't be able to tell you what the borders are. You ask an Israeli, what are your borders? Some will say it's the Green Line. Some will say it's the Jordan River. Some will say it's the blocks. You got 50 answers, and they're all wrong because Israel's never made a decision on this issue. Now they'll say to you something like, look, we'll never give up Hebron, never give up Beit El, never give up East Jerusalem. But it's all just platitudes. I mean, there's never been any a serious movement to really do this on a national consensus. And I say, guys, you need to really figure this out. And once you figure it out, now people can imagine where I stand on it, but I'm not Israeli, and I'm not looking to to make those kinds of political decisions for Israel. But if you think about it, we made one mistake in Gaza, which is we left Gaza, but we also lost our security presence in Gaza, and we ended up with Hamas. That can't happen in Judea and Samaria. There's 500,000 Jews that live there. But what I think Israel could do is to say, look, we're going to exercise our sovereignty from the Jordan River to the sea, to the Mediterranean Sea, because we have to control the security here. We're not going to let another army, plant itself in this area. At the same token, we're willing to create within that, significant subdivisions with massive amounts of civilian autonomy and dignity and prosperity in ways that frankly, nobody will even notice the fact that whether or not they're voting in a national election or not. Now, in America, people are uncomfortable with that because it's not what we do in America, except that maybe we do it in America because we have Puerto Rico, right? And we have Guam, right? So to say that we don't do it in America is not even true, right? Because we have territories where people don't have the right to vote in the national elections. So, and then, the argument is, well, you can't keep an army, in someone else's land. Well, we did that after we defeated Japan in World War II. We still have a big base in Okinawa. We've got a big base in Ramstein in Germany after we defeated the Germans. I mean, it's not so simple. And America has done lots of the things that it doesn't want Israel to do. So I think Israel needs to move forward on its own in a way that, on the one hand, protects its own sovereignty and security, but on the other hand, and equally important, it has to do so with real compassion, with real money behind it to help bring the Palestinians up to a level of life and dignity and prosperity that Israel can be proud of and the Palestinians can be proud of. All that can be done at the same time. We should stop trying to model Israel after America. America was created on the basis of there being no establishment of any religion, right? I mean, there's a First Amendment that prohibits the establishment of religion in America, and it works great. And I'm a big fan of the First Amendment, but we don't have a First Amendment in Israel. We never will. It's a Jewish state. But you know what? There's like 40 other countries in the world that have national religions, and nobody's giving them a hard time. So to have one Jewish state, in which we do what we need to do to protect the demographics of a Jewish state, while at the same time treating those who are stuck in this battle over the last 50 years, treating them with dignity and autonomy, it's not a bad outcome. Not perfect, but it's not a bad outcome.
Will they accept it?
Well, look, the answer is no. And the answer is also that they have a history of adapting to and accepting facts on the ground, meaning they won't say yes, but I would bet, it's an educated but unprovable bet, that if we could get Palestinian society up to a GDP per capita of $25,000, I think all this stuff would be water under the bridge, and we would just be moving on in a peaceful environment. if we allow the Palestinians to have access to a port in Haifa, the Shin Bet can check everything for security and then just let it zoom into on a fast train into Ramallah or Jenin, let them collect customs and duties, I think we'd be far ahead. If we got rid of these antiquated checkpoints into Israel and made them, which Israel already has in about a third of them, but could get people moving in and out, where it didn't take 6 hours to get to work. It could take like it takes to get through an airplane line, a short airplane line, where you have TSA and things like that. I mean, there are things that can be done, especially with modern technology, to make everybody's lives much better. The better the lives are, the less friction there is, the greater chance for peace. Maybe 50 years from now, there'll be a better outcome that emerges. But I think this will make things better. Maybe with a little bit of friction, but remember, Mahmoud Abbas is, he's hanging on. He's not going to be around for too much longer. And when he is gone, there's no clear successor. And in that context, if you can start injecting opportunity, there'll be at least one political leader who says, you know what, I want to tell my people that I got them better roads, or I got them, and so it may be the right time. I mean, one more thing I would just say on all this, because I think it's important and it doesn't get that much attention, and I learned this lesson from interacting a lot with people in the Muslim world. It's not insignificant that our biblical history almost all took place in Judea and Samaria. I just finished a movie with Mike Pompeo. It's called Route 60, The Biblical Highway. And it's going to air in January or February. And it's a documentary. And this one Route 60 in the West Bank, it starts in Nazareth and it ends in Beersheba. And it goes through Shlem and it goes through Shiloh and Beit El and Jerusalem and Rachel's tomb and Bethlehem and Hebron, all the way to Beersheba, which Beersheba, by the way, is the original Abraham Accord between Abraham and Avimelech, right? So when I speak to people in the Muslim world, I ask them this question. I said, you know our Bible, you know our history. It's your Bible too. I mean, we both accept the Old Testament. You understand that that God promised land to Abraham. Now, maybe you think Abraham is the father of Ishmael as well. I get that, but he also promised it to Jacob. And once you get to Jacob, you're pretty much you're in the Jewish world. You're not in the joint world. So we have these promises from God. We have this history of places like, I'll throw out an example, Shiloh, where Shmuel was born, where Hannah taught us how to pray. Right? We didn't have prayer really until Hannah came along, where the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant rested for almost 400 years. If when I talk to the people in the Muslim world, the takeaway I get is, if you give that up, then you don't really stand for anything. Like, what do you stand for if you give that up? You stand for a bunch of high rises in Tel Aviv. That tells us that you're weak, and causes us to be less likely to make a deal with you, more likely. Because we wouldn't give that up if we were you. Like, we wouldn't give up our holy sites. I mean, they're holy. We're a religious society. These are holy sites. So what I'm finding, as I go around, the world and talk to people, first of all, there's deep respect in the Muslim world for the Jewish biblical heritage. Not only do they not think that it's kind of phony and inhumane, they fully understand why the Jewish people would want to cling to this ancient heritage. And the people who seem the most willing to negotiate this away, unfortunately, are some of our own people. And I understand the desire to show that you're willing to give things up and you're willing to be fair and you're willing to be open. But what I would tell those people is it's in the Middle East, it has precisely the reverse effect.
Yes.
The more you say you're willing to give this stuff up, the less people are going to want to make peace with you.
Exactly. And there's something similar in the way the U.S. administration, whether it's Barack Obama or whether it's Donald Trump, treat the Palestinian. When Donald Trump came into office, one of the things he did was cut the amount of money that was given to the Palestinians, which they could use to reward people who kill Jews, is an attempt by America to deal with that, but different administrations take that act to a different degree, seriously or not. The sense we have is that when there is an administration which seems to be shoulder to shoulder with the state of Israel, the Palestinian is more ready to make a compromise than he is when an administration comes in and seems to favor the Palestinian, or goes to Cairo. It doesn't go to Jerusalem, goes to Cairo and gives a speech in front of the Muslim Brotherhood. At that point, there again, the Muslim world seems to feel that they have a right to push back hard on Israel because of American administration support. Now, am I describing something you relate to?
It's the single most important point that I have taken away from my 4 years in government. People say to me, how'd you make peace with the United Arab Emirates and with Sudan and Morocco and Bahrain? What was the most important thing you did? And I said, well, we moved our embassy to Jerusalem. So they say that can't be right. How in the world does moving the embassy to Jerusalem advance the cause of peace with the Arab world? I said, no, you don't understand. When America stands unapologetically with Israel and made this statement, recognizing that there would be blowback from the EU and from the United Nations and the Quartet and everything, when America, notwithstanding all that, makes a stand with Israel, Israel becomes a far more attractive candidate for peace with the Arab world, because the Arab world says, you know what? This relationship that Israel has with America is very special. How do we get in on it? How do we get part of it? Because everybody wants to be allied with America. It's the most important ally, the most reliable ally. And so that was the beginning where these countries opened their eyes. Now, if you remember, when Donald Trump, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, there was almost no violence anywhere in the Arab world. Now, in many of these Arab countries, the leadership controls the streets. They want violence, there'll be violence. They don't want violence, there won't be any. There was no violence anywhere in the Arab street. When we moved the embassy, we had violence only in Gaza, which had already started, before we moved the embassy, and was a function of a lot of factors, only one of which was the embassy move. But that was it. It was just limited there. There was when we moved the embassy and made the decision on Jerusalem, we used to spend days checking in with the embassies throughout the Arab world, from Morocco all the way to Pakistan. What's the temperature? How's it look? Are we going to have violence? Who do we need to protect? What embassies will be under threat? And I remember listening to all these ambassadors saying, "Oh, we got to ramp up. We got it." And I said, "Yeah, where is the intel that tells you that we're going to have a problem?" And they would say, "Oh no, well, they're going to be angry because they don't like this." I said, "Look, you don't need to go to school for 10 years to know they're going to be angry. But what are you seeing in the intel that we don't see, that the world doesn't see?" And there was nothing. And I came to the conclusion that we would be fine. I told that to the president. I said, from what we see, I think it's going to be fine. And it's not because we got lucky. It's because we were able to perceive the fact that this issue that in Israel we spend so much time thinking about, and the Jewish community spends so much time thinking about, at the end of the day, this is not high on anybody else's list, including in the Arab world. But they want a strong Israel. They want a strong Israel way more than they want, than almost any other country in the region. They want a strong Israel. A strong Israel is a bulwark against Iran. It's a bulwark against radical terrorists. Israel shares its intelligence and its assets with its Muslim allies. They're a very good partner to have in this region. It's a very tough region, and so. This other stuff, we always make more of it than it really is, and that was our breakthrough in government, was to recognize that this is more of a paper tiger, and we can accomplish great diplomatic advances with Israel. Not only would we withstand the blowback from the Arab world, but it would actually bring us to a state of greater peace and normalization with the Arab world. And look, that's the way it worked out.
By the way, the one criticism I heard of the Abraham Accords was that it did not include the Palestinians. Speak to that a moment.
It wasn't for lack of trying. It's not that we, but we made it very clear to the Palestinians. This was true about Jerusalem, and it began with Jerusalem. We said, look, we want to help you. We want to work with you. We'd be delighted to give you money if you could give us a reason to give you money. If you could show us why this money is being well spent, we'd be delighted to give it to you. It's not like, we're cutting back. Right, we're just not going to give you money if you're going to spend it on malign purposes. So he said, look, on the one hand, we're your friends, but here's where we're different from everybody else. By the way, Republican and Democrat. It's not a criticism necessarily of Democrats. You don't have a veto on what we do in this region. This region is too important to the United States and too volatile. We're not giving you like a veto, and we're checking with you what we do. And the first way we showed that is when we moved the embassy. We said, look, we don't care. You don't like it. We understand you don't like it, but it's our decision where we put our embassy in a foreign country. It's not your decision. We're going to do it. And then, we took another step in the Golan Heights. We took another step in terms of how we viewed the legality of settlements. And again, the more we did that, the more America said we're going to chart our own course in the Middle East without, with Palestinian input, but not with a Palestinian veto. The more these other countries, which have their own, decades-long frustration with the Palestinians, said, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because there was a time when the UAE wouldn't have thought of normalizing with Israel without the Palestinians' approval. The Palestinians to this day feel betrayed by the Saudis, by the Emiratis, by the Bahrainis, they feel betrayed by everyone because they can't unlock this sense of victimization, which animates everything they do. They're always victims, and that's how they see everything, as being victims. But the reality is that these other countries, they got their own citizenship, they got their own issues, their own national security issues. And they did what was best for them, and Israel did what was best for Israel. We did what was best for America. And that's that breaking of the Palestinian veto was essential to everything that will come next.
I wondered whether you had certain ideas as you entered these 4 years. Was there a big surprise, or, you understood more and more and more, but you never said to yourself, wow, that's something that never occurred to me, and it's important that I understand it. Was there anything like that for you?
Look, you come into this job. I got the highest level of security clearance, so I'm now seeing things that I had never seen before, didn't know about, and obviously can't talk about now. Look, there is a big difference between being a pundit, being an advocate, and being a leader. Mm-hmm. When you're a leader, you really can't afford to be wrong. When you're a pundit, you can be wrong all the time because nobody is paying attention to what you're saying anyway. But as a leader, you can't be wrong. You don't have the same margin of error. So whereas before I'd be advocating to move the embassy, the day Trump enters office, and there was actually some thought about doing that. I remember Steve Bannon and I talked about that, doing it on Inauguration Day. But then you say, what? We haven't been around long enough to understand all the ramifications, and we have to figure it out. So look, there's a lot of information that I gained access to. At the end of the day, none of it changed any of my views that I came into office with, but it certainly helped me to strategize those views, to actualize them, to come up with plans. What I wasn't anticipating was the State Department, which is a massive organization with a deeply embedded view of Israel as a problem in the Middle East rather than as a solution. And that changed with Mike Pompeo. I want to be clear, Mike Pompeo does not have that view, but Mike wasn't around the first couple of years. And the view inside of the State Department is Israel is a political asset of the American leadership. It's an asset that has to be managed in a way in which there's no political fallout in America for either party. No president really in this day and age wants to be viewed as anti-Israel. But at the same time, Israel is the U.S. relationship with Israel is something which makes it harder for America to execute its foreign policy in the rest of the Middle East.
Why?
And
Why?
well, this was, James Mattis, who was the Secretary of Defense for a couple of years. His view was that in fighting the Gulf Wars, whether it was the first one with Saddam Hussein, or whether it was against Afghanistan in the aftermath of 9/11, or dealing with the Taliban, as America is fighting with the Emirates and other Arab partners, it was harder to get these countries to trust America because of America's relationship with Israel, and that it held America back in terms of all it could achieve. Now, I don't know if that's right or wrong. I never studied it, but that was Mattis's view, and I think he offered that view from without any anti-Semitic bones in his body. I think that was his perspective, and I think that is the way the State Department and the military have viewed Israel in the past. Now, Abraham Accords changed a lot of that. Iran, the threat that Iran poses to all these countries, changed a lot of that. My experience was that Mattis gave up too quickly on reconciling the views of Israel and our Arab partners. And the truth is that one of the things I did, and I get almost no recognition for this, not that I'm looking for it, but the U.S. military is divided into regions. We have it's called one is EUCOM, which is the European Command. One is AFRICOM, as you might the African Command. CENTCOM, the Central Command, is the Middle East, where most of the wars are fought. Now, until a year ago, Israel was in EUCOM. Now, what is Israel doing in EUCOM? I mean, Israel's not involved in any battles in Europe, and there really aren't that many battles in Europe. Why isn't Israel part of the Central Command, working with partners? And it was because the other Arab countries didn't want to have Israel within their, joint command with the United States. So I revisited that and said, is that really the case? Because I'd be surprised. I would think some of these countries would like nothing more than to train with Israelis. Sure enough, the military looked into it and said, yeah, you have to be right. They actually welcome it. And so Israel is now part of CENTCOM,
wow,
which is a very important byproduct of all these normalizations that people don't really realize. I mean, Israel trains now with the Emirates. They train sometimes with the Saudis. I mean, they train with other countries, of course, obviously, maintaining their own secrets, but so the State Department had this view that you would manage Israel, you kind of keep them at arm's length, but you would not too much so that you would jeopardize the political relationships between Israel and the United States. And I came in and said, guys, I don't think Israel's a problem. I think it's a solution. I think you got this all backwards. And they said, that's great. Guy practiced, a litigator and a bankruptcy lawyer comes in after 35 years in the law firm and tells us, because we've dedicated our entire lives.
Yes.
We've served in diplomatic missions across the entire Middle East, and you're coming in and telling us. And I said, look, I'm just telling you what I think. I think that Israel's a really strong, powerful country. I think Israel and all these countries have common threats with Iran. They also have common threats with extremism, other forms of extremism. And I think that a strong Israel is very much consistent with a strong Arabian peninsula. And look, over time that just evolved to be the case. I mean, it made sense at the time, but that was the case. I had a very interesting conversation a year or two ago with the foreign minister of the Emirates. His name is Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed. I asked him, what was your driving force for the Abraham Accords? And he said to me, look, the world has really changed. We're rarely, Russia, Ukraine being probably the only exception that proves the rule. But he said, rarely do countries actually go to war with each other anymore. What really is happening, we're really talking about a battle of ideologies. And the battle of ideologies is between country and country, and more importantly, it's inside every country. So, we in the Arab Emirates, we have extremists, okay? And we want to defeat those extremists. In Israel, you have extremists. In America, you have extremists. So the Abraham Accords is really fundamentally an alliance of nations with a common interest to fight extremism. And I thought that was very profound. I think that's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm. That is a story we don't know. So it's very, very interesting. All right, I want to take a moment. You were part of the Trump administration, and you personally, and Donald Trump as president. It's interesting to me they are not they didn't nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. They normally do nominate the leader of the country that from which the peace process emanates. Anyway, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. There is within the Jewish community and the overall American community people who ridicule is the best you get, and hate and despise is more accurate. There are families that don't talk to each other because there are people who support Trump and people who think if you support Trump, as they thought about you at one point, you're just evil. You're evil. And very often, my sense is, and I could be wrong, a lot of what is said about Trump has nothing to do with the man himself, but is I'm sorry to say it, is a media concoction because there is a very, very anti-Trump bias. Now, that does not mean that Trump has not made mistakes, sometimes serious mistakes, and I understand why there are many people who don't like him. But one of the things that happened during your 4 years was that people spoke about the question, to what extent does Donald Trump really care about the state of Israel? And I would often meet with Jews who would say to me, I don't trust him. And if he and Bibi ever have a falling out, he could change his mind. He changed his mind about North Korea. Why can't he change his mind about Israel? And I don't trust him. And, I don't think even though he has Jewish grandchildren, I don't see that as such a big factor in his life. I'm asking you, to the extent to which you are in a position to say anything fair, to what extent, and we're going to limit it right now to Donald Trump and Israel, to what extent did Donald Trump understand what was going on, have a real opinion about what was going on? To what extent did he sort of say to you, David, I will follow your lead here. That's why I chose you as ambassador. To what extent was he flailing around? What can you tell us?
So, I don't think he was flailing around. I think I'll just back up first, and then I'll answer your question. Look, I totally understand. I followed it. I lived through the anti-Trump movement. But like any candidate, we've had in history, there's going to be people that don't like him. There's people that do like him. Why is the anti-Trump sentiment so strong compared to the people who might not like other presidents? Like all presidents these days have favorability ratings under 50%. Obama had it, Trump had it, Biden has it, Bush had it. I mean, it's not like he's the first president to be unpopular. So why does he get this stuff? I mean, to me, it's all a function of style. It's not really a function of substance. Look, he goes from the White House to Marine One to get on the helicopter to go someplace, and there's a gaggle of reporters, and he stops, and he takes questions, and he talks, and he's got thin skin, and somebody insults him, and then he gets angry, and then he says something that's not scripted, and he does this all the time. And the people that are responsible for kind of managing his media presentation, they start to sweat, and they start to have heart attacks, and he goes off script, and that's just who he is. The good side of it is that he's not hiding any aspect of himself. This is exactly who he is. He's not pretending to be somebody else. But I get why people don't like it, because he's brash, and he can be so politically incorrect that it offends people, and I get all that. I mean, I look at it from a couple of perspectives. The first is, if you leave COVID aside for a minute, COVID's a whole nother once in 100 years story. But if you take COVID off the table for a second, if you went into a coma in January of 2017 and you woke up in January of 2021, and you woke up and you said, well, what's the world? What's going on in the world? How's it look? You looked at financial metrics. You looked at unemployment. You looked at Israel. You looked at the world stage. You looked at the state of conflict within the world. You looked at the economy. You looked at the stock market. You looked at all those things. You would say, well, whoever's been in charge has done a pretty good job. And I think that ought to be the metric by which we judge any leader. I mean, not just Trump. I would judge Biden the same way, or Obama. So everything besides that, in a world of social media and in a world of click bites and the need to get people to click on your website and everything, I understand. Like, I think he had a very clear understanding of Israel, which is obviously the area where I had the strongest discussions with him. He had a lot of people talking in his ear. So, I mean, he wasn't naturally endowed with knowledge about Israel. It wasn't like something he cared about or studied about before he became president. So, which is true of lots of other presidents as well. So he had to rely upon others. Now, some of the people he relied upon, I think, gave him bad advice. There were people that he relied upon, serious people, with serious backgrounds and portfolios, who told him that Abu Mazen was ready to make a deal. He'd given up. He was ready to give up Jerusalem, ready to give up on refugees, ready to really strike a deal that he would endorse, that Israel could live with. It wasn't true. Wasn't remotely true. But he got that advice. He wanted to explore that. When we were talking about the Abraham Accords and the run up to that, and the issue about whether Israel should have sovereignty over certain aspects of Judea and Samaria. Again, a lot of people weighed in, and he had some views, and he and I, didn't agree on some of those things towards the end, because I was much more bullish on that than he was. But I think he understood. There was nothing that I did that wasn't preceded by a long conversation with him, and an explanation and an authorization. Now, where did we come out? Well, of the 10 or 15 people that had his ear, very much giving different points of view, I managed to prevail almost all the time in having my view carry the day. Mm-hmm. I consider that, frankly, God's will. I mean, I don't know why that happened. It's not like he and I are so close, or that he would naturally have affinity towards me, but he did. I think he respected me and trusted me and knew that I would always give him a straight answer, regardless of the fact that he was the president of the United States. So that happened. And look, I mean, I wrote a book about this, as I think and I attribute a lot of divine intervention here. I don't think these types of things, these consequential things, can happen without God somehow putting his finger on the scale or more. So one of the things I said, Mark, is that, there were probably 10 or 15 things that had to go right, in order for these 4 years to end up the way they did. And each one of those things was probably maybe like a 1 out of 6 chance. So, it's easy to do the math, like you're rolling a die, right? You have a 1 out of 6 chance of rolling a 3. Right? What are the chances you're going to roll a 3 10 times in a row? The answer is it's like one out of 60 million, right? So at some point, you hit a level of improbability of these 4 years as it relates to Israel, a level of improbability which really makes you start thinking a lot about God, because things this improbable don't happen. You don't win lottery tickets in life, you just don't. And so I'm a believer, and I felt very much that this was part of a divine plan. But either way, I mean, Trump is I think he has very good instincts. I think he's a quick study. I think he knew all these issues. I think he had strong views of it. If you want to ask me to predict where he'll be in another term, I wouldn't even begin to speculate about the future. But looking back on the 4 years, I think we had we spoke when we needed to. I don't think any ambassador came back to America more than I did. I was back sometimes monthly, sometimes even more often. I wouldn't waste my time talking to anybody but him. I would go to the Oval Office, and we'd have some pretty frank and good discussions. So at least on my little tiny narrow issue, I felt that he was engaged, and understood the issues and made the right calls.
By the way, if it should happen that he does decide to run, and if it should happen that he wins, and he asks you to be ambassador to Israel again, what would you say?
You know, I don't see how I could possibly say no. I mean, I just think that
Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. There's something very comforting in hearing that, David. All right, I have one more issue for you,
Sure.
and I saw you addressed it on Twitter. We're meeting. By the way, we're meeting. Interestingly enough, right after a week after the Israeli elections. Yesterday were the midterm elections, and it's not clear exactly yet, as we're talking now, how the House and Senate will fall out. But we're also meeting after a very scathing piece was published in the New York Times by Thomas Friedman, in which he said Israel is over as we know it. And his point was that Netanyahu has cobbled together a far right coalition that includes in it people whom Thomas Friedman says at one point were not accepted into mainstream Israeli thinking or even in politics. And you know, there are those who were descendants of the Kahana Koch party and are virulently anti-Arab and are anti-Arab at a time when the Palestinian Israeli is more and more now involved in violence inside the state of Israel against Israelis, Jews, as well as other Palestinian Arabs. Anyway, the bottom line is he considers this to be just the end, that Israel has moved so far right that American Jewry and the United States will not be able to retain a relationship to Israel as it has in the past. What's your reaction to Friedman's piece?
Look, I think it's completely ridiculous for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, Netanyahu didn't cobble together this group. He ran with this group. I mean, he rarely does a party, you know, develop a bloc before the elections. He said, look, vote for me, and I'm going to put together a bloc with religious Zionism and the two ultra-Orthodox parties. And that's exactly what he did. So he did exactly what he said he's going to do. I alluded to this earlier. There's a big difference between what people say when they're on the outside and what people do when they're in a position of leadership. Let's see how they lead. Netanyahu is not going to let Israel, you know, go off the rails. And frankly, I don't think any of the people who are going to be the future leaders of Israel will do that. There is a greater respect in this government for Israel's Jewish identity. I think that's good. I think it's a Jewish state, and I'm happy that happened. But you got to, I mean, I think you sort of have to understand the push and pull of politics. You know, I tell people Trump never would have gotten elected if we hadn't first had Obama. You know, if you know, you go back to Bush and Clinton, right? And you'd be hard pressed now, you know, 20 years or 30 years afterwards to actually come up with a coherent argument off the cuff of the differences between Bush and Clinton. You know, one was Republican, one was Democrat, but you know, they were sort of both governing from the middle. Obama comes along and he took the country very far to the left. That pendulum swung wide and it swung back wide the same way, and that's how we got Trump. Now, why do we have the Israeli government that we do today? Because that's an obvious reaction to people on the right feeling betrayed by Naftali Bennett. I mean, they voted for Naftali Bennett thinking he would be loyal to a right-wing government. And whether you agree or not with Bennett's change of heart, and whether you think he did it for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, many people on the right who have been supporting Bennett for several elections, they felt betrayed because he did exactly the opposite of what he promised he would never do. Again, You can look at what he did and say, we like what he did. He was right to change his mind. But I'm saying is that this is a reaction to the past government. What we need to do in Israel and America, if we can, is to narrow the bandwidth of that pendulum and try to have governments that are somewhere between center right, center left. I
yes.
We're not there. We're getting these wide swings, and here's why it's bad for people like me. It's bad for people like me because as I try to develop coalitions, the Saudis will say, like, how do we know you'll be around? And the new guy is going to, look, we did it with Iran. To make a deal and rip it up. I think it was the right move to rip up the Iran deal. I think it was very important to do. But America, to make a deal and then rip it up in the next administration, signals that, as a country, as an institution, we're not all that reliable. And so, and that's sort of where politics are today. It's the same thing in Italy, same thing in Sweden. But like everything else in politics, it will change. Look, when as you know, just as well as me, when Menachem Begin came to power, people were saying this is the end of Israeli democracy.
That's right.
And this is a Jewish terrorist, and he blew up the King David Hotel, and he was the first non-Labor Party candidate, and he ended up being he's certainly in the conversation for the greatest prime minister that Israel ever had, and he made the Camp David Accords with Egypt, which is essential to Israel's long-term strategic safety. Ronald Reagan, when he came to power, they said, he's going to start wars and everything, and he brought the end of the Soviet Union. So it's Thomas Friedman. He's a pundit. Pundits can afford to be wrong. Thomas Friedman was the guy who said that the Arab Spring would bring Egypt into a world of glorious liberal democracy. He was wrong then. He's been wrong on other times. I think people need to kind of take a deep breath, let the government form, let them develop their policies. I'm sure that there will be people in America who find those policies, worthy of criticism. But they don't live in Israel. Like I always tell Americans, if you really care that much about the Israeli government, move to Israel and you can vote and you can have a say in the government. But the Israelis don't vote in American elections, and they respect I'm sure that the Israelis would prefer somebody other than Joe Biden in the White House, but they're going to respect the office because that's what Israelis do, and that's what other countries do. American Jews need to take a deep breath and support Israel. There is no Jewish world without Israel. I mean, you can try to convince yourself that you can go it alone in America, but you can't. I mean, there were 5 million Jews in America in 1948, and there were 600,000 Israelis in 1948. And today, there's still 5 million Jews in America, and there's 7 million Jews in Israel. The entirety of the trend is in Israel. The rest of the diaspora is shrinking. America's staying flat, and Israel is where the growth of Jewish life is. So, you turn away Israel at your peril. There's not much left in America without Israel.
Okay, I just want to read a sentence, and you, again, react to it any way you wish. This is Thomas Friedman. A fundamental question. Will royal synagogues in America and across the globe, quote, do I support this Israel or not support it? It will haunt pro-Israel students on college campuses. It will challenge Arab allies of Israel in the Abraham Accords, who just wanted to trade with Israel and never signed up for defending a government that is anti-Israeli Arab. It will stress those U.S. diplomats, those who have reflectively defended Israel as a Jewish democracy that shares America's values, and it will send friends of Israel in Congress fleeing from any reporter asking if America should continue spending billions of dollars in aid to such a religious, extremist-inspired government. What do you say, David?
No way. look, Americans who are using this as an excuse to withhold support from Israel never really supported Israel.
Right.
Because if you only support Israel when it's got the government that you like, but you otherwise deny the rights of the Israeli people to elect their own officials, then you're not a real friend. You're a fair weather friend, and those friends Israel doesn't need. Look, there's a reason again why these people were elected. I mean, all that really happened when you think about it. The ultra Orthodox got maybe one more seat than they usually get. Likud got fewer seats than they usually get, and the religious Zionist party got more seats. They got more seats because the people who live in that world, felt betrayed and wanted to make sure that there were enough members of the Knesset that wouldn't sit with anti-Zionist parties, and that's their prerogative. They're not bad people for voting the way they voted, and I think, look, the other thing is this. I don't know Itamar Ben-Gvir very well. I don't, but he's lived his last 10, 15 years in Kiryat Arba. Now, living in Kiryat Arba, you're going to develop a very different view of Israel than living in Tel Aviv. It's a place which gets assaulted regularly, by Palestinian terrorists. So, look, we should treat Itamar Ben-Gvir the same way we would treat somebody in American politics who grew up in a poor, underprivileged urban environment, who says, if someone gets up and says, look, I get beaten up by the cops all the time. I feel threatened. I don't feel like I'm part of society. We would embrace that person and want to make them feel differently, and want to understand why, and want to get rid of the conditions that cause someone to feel that way. Well, look, I mean, Itamar Ben-Gvir feels the same way. And whether he's right or he's wrong, and I don't think any of us want to accept, either side of that example, to take their recommendations, at face value. But no matter what, it represents a point of view of a significant number of Israelis who feel kind of abandoned by the Israeli security establishment. They're out there to defend themselves in these remote locations, and feel that that Israel needs to be stronger defending the Jewish people. Look, Mark, that, and I'll just say again, without rushing to Itamar Ben-Gvir's defense, the things that he said, which essentially fall into the category, if Arabs aren't loyal to the state of Israel, they should leave. That's essentially his message. Israel has, 10 members of the Knesset who routinely, deny any loyalty to the state of Israel at all. They're sitting in the Knesset. Their job is to represent, the best interest of the state of Israel, and they don't support the state of Israel at all. And American Jews actually take great pride in the fact that Israel accepts that segment of society.
Yes.
So we just need to understand there are people who develop strong views who live on the periphery. They haven't been in positions of leadership before. Let them get into leadership. Let's see where things go. And ultimately, I think Netanyahu is an experienced enough leader to do what is necessary to make sure that Israel maintains the diplomatic relations, the economic relations that it needs to continue to be a strong, prosperous country. I know he will. I know him better than I know anybody else in the Israeli government. He was the prime minister for 4 years when I was the ambassador. We spoke regularly. I just met with him. Frankly, I had dinner with him this past week. Of all the Israeli leaders, I can tell you that the people in the Arab world, I think, are very comfortable with Bibi. So when you say that the Arabs are going to run away, no, I think the Arabs are very comfortable with Bibi because they see in Bibi the kind of leader that's necessary in the Middle East.
You are fabulous. And, I'm wondering to myself, were you always this smart, even as a child? I don't know. I don't care. It is wonderful talking to you, and I love you very much. And I am, again, so grateful for the time you've given me on L'chaim. I think there is so much insight you have shared with our audience, and I wish you kol tuv hatzlacha in all of your life, wherever you go. How many of your children live in Israel now?
Right now, I'm down to one, but I think it's going to go back up to 2 or 3.
Okay. Anyway, whatever you're doing, you and your wife and your children and your, was it 11 grandchildren?
Yes.
Amazing. that you have happiness and real fulfillment in what you do. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha, and I hope you will let me call you again, and we'll continue the discussion. But again, my profound thanks, David. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mark. I really, really enjoyed our conversation, and anytime you want me back, just give a holler. I'll be happy to do it.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
There you have it. The former ambassador to the State of Israel from the United States, David Friedman. And his perspective is so interesting, and he's not afraid to say things which you don't hear, especially from American politicians, or for that matter, from Israeli politicians. It was thrilling for me to sit here and listen to him. I hope you enjoyed it as well. As always, a list of thanks. I want to begin with thanking Sarit Katz. Sarit is the one who helped us arrange this interview with David Friedman. Sarit, I am most grateful. Thanks also to our stage manager, Vlada Barash, our senior producer, Carol Lilienthal, as always, our wonderful director, Sloan Copeland, and to Michael Paley, who helped produce the program, my deepest thanks. My special thanks, by the way, to you. I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have. Email me at rabbigolub@jbstv.org. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.